Alexia spricht über die Harmonisierung und Verlinkung von Sekundärdaten. Ich glaube, das schließt ganz gut an den ersten Vortrag.
So,
Das ist einfach gerade weiter. Gut, bitteschön.
Ja, ich glaube, das ist super, dass ich genau direkt nach Georg komme, weil die ersten Probleme, die man als Nutzer oder als Archiv beides, von beiden Seiten lösen muss, ist von dieser Open Science Perspektive. Und dann kommt die eigentliche Nutzung von Daten. Ich hoffe, dass es kein großes Problem ist, wenn ich auf Englisch das mache. Es ist einfacher für mich, ein bisschen so in so einen Rhythmus zu kommen. So I'm Alexia Katsanidou. I am a professor at the University of Cologne and a political scientist, but we focus on empirical social research at this stage. My main job actually is at GESIS. GESIS is very similar to FORCE, and there I'm leading one small part of GESIS that actually curates survey data. So just to give you a very quick overview, if I can change the slide would be better. Give me a second. Okay, very quick overview of GESIS because I saw that also Georg did it. So GESIS is from structure very similar to FORCE and a bit further from AUSSDA because we focus on every step of the research data cycle. So we start to support users at when they plan their studies and collect their data. Then we support them when they need to find and access new data. We also offer services on analyzing and processing data. And of course, when you're done with your research, and that's similar to AUSSDA, is we support you with archiving and sharing your data. And across this whole data lifecycle or research lifecycle, we have also training and consulting services. So things like research data management is quite prominent in this training and consulting. The surveys you have seen also at Georg's presentation is pretty much the same, plus some German local ones. So the German longitudinal election study or the Politbarometer, for example. Just to give you a hint about which one is being downloaded the most, because that was one of the questions for Georg, is of course the Eurobarometer, because everybody wants it. And it's Eurobarometer, you know for sure, it's nothing that researchers collect. It's collected by the European Commission and occasionally by the European Parliament. So it's not the best survey you can ever use, but its regularity and the fact that it started in the 70s and continues onwards, it makes it very attractive. So currently at GESIS, we have taken a step out from surveys, or further than surveys. We continue our core business surveys, but we have added a new component with digital behavioral data, found data, but also designed data. And the idea is not only to provide those for research, but also to link them with surveys. And this is what the basis of my presentation today, the thoughts that we've made on how actually researchers use surveys and what can you do with new data types. Now, here, what you see, GESIS has what we call community data collection. That is about 6,700 studies. That is the data archive of GESIS. And here you see the set of downloads 2021, 2020, and 2019. And what we also collect is the purpose of the download. So you see from these 6,700 studies, to be honest, all of them or most of them, like 80 to 90% of them, are downloaded every year. Concentration, of course, to the few that I showed you. And within those, most of them are used for academic studies and scientific research. And yeah, very, very little of those commercial mandate research. So it's everything for the research that we're doing. Now, here's an example. This nice Eurobarometer figure that you see is an example of data linking. Very simple. So we see the average of respondents and estimates on the question, to your knowledge, what is the proportion of immigrants in the total population in your country? and that is the light blue. And that on the country level is linked to the Eurostat official data on the actual migration of the country. As a researcher, you immediately recognize what's going on. People overreact, think that there is a much more immigrants than there actually are in the country. But also as a researcher, you see, okay, how do they link actually this type of data? You see, okay, this is a quite easy data linking procedure because you simply need the country, and then you average out on the country level, the Eurobarometer, and then the same thing on Eurostat. So how are data used in research? Yeah, they're used, of course, in single studies. They're used in comparative data sets. So data coming, for example, Eurobarometer coming from different countries, and then they have to be harmonized and attached together, linked together to provide you a full Eurobarometer, full EU data set. The harmonized data sets that track over time changes. For example, Eurobarometer has once, or more than once, but we have one in well-archived sample of this, the Mannheim Eurobarometer trend file that collects, that combines data from the Eurobarometer from more than 30 years. And then other people, what they do is they link information on top of the survey data, like here, Eurostat official data, or the Gini index, or electoral results, you name it, you have done it. And of course, there's record linkage, where not in GESIS case, but in other cases, for example, in the UK, you have cooperations of data archives together with the official statistics. And there you can give the respondents IDs, and they give you also there, for example, NHS, like record link records. And they keep it anonymous, but you as a researcher, you get the full real data about the person. Okay, so as a researcher, when you give your data, like this balloon here from Banksy, you don't know where it's going. You give full freedom to the next researcher who will come along, download your data, and play with it. So you don't know what's going to happen. So there are two things that I would like to focus on, and this is harmonization of the data. So you can link them across time and across space. And the second thing would be data linking. So the definition that we're using on harmonization at GESIS, but I'm assuming it will be not very far from what you will have in mind if you're thinking about it, is basically merging secondary data from different sources, for research purposes, of course, by adding cases, so rows, to a standard rectangular data set. So you have your data, your SPSS, your R data set, then you add cases, so more respondents. So with cases in rows and variables in columns, so we have more respondents in the data set as opposed to adding variables to the same cases, which would be the data linking procedure. So think about it very simply. You have the Eurobarometer data set that is taken a specific moment in 2022, for example, and you want to compare it to the same people before the pandemic, for example. Well, not the same people, the same of course, you can't have the same people, but the same countries before the pandemic. So you want to add a 2019 data set with the same questions. So you harmonize and you create a new data set that is double the size because you have combined two data sets and have respondents from 2 years. Of course, they're not the same respondents. So why do researchers harmonize? The easiest answer is to deepen the knowledge about certain research topics. No? So you want to think about, okay, what happened in 2022 and what happened in 2019. I want to check if the effects of a specific variable on a dependent variable is the same in both years. Second thing would be to widen the scope of a certain analysis by pulling data on different countries. So for example, you want to see, okay, I don't want to simply analyze Germany or Austria, but I want actually to have a look on the whole of Europe. So you take your European value study, for example, as more than 40 countries, and you say, okay, somebody has pre-harmonized everything for me. So I take the full data set, or ESS, no, and analyze that. And then with that, you demonstrate the validity of a model in different institutional contexts. So for example, you want to see, okay, I want to run an analysis, but I want to see to what extent a proportional electoral system or a majoritarian electoral system has an impact on my dependent variable. And that is allowed through this harmonization. So to substantially increase the sample size is also very important. So we want to go, for example, in an in-depth analysis for small groups. So what do you do if you want to see, for example, migrants? You create a data set that's harmonized to increase the sample size and be able to do your analysis of migrants if you don't have an oversampling of this particular population. It's often done also for birth cohorts if you want to do this type of work. So that's the three main reasons why researchers harmonize. But there are problems, of course, when you harmonize. You have definitely in your work seen them as well. I will focus on three main problems that also you heard them a little bit at Georg's presentation as problems of the open science. But here, if we go deeper, you will get our hands dirty with the data. There's not only a data management problem, but it's mainly, if you want, a data conceptualization, operationalization problem, a little bit of touch of theory. So the first and most important and difficult to solve problem is the comparability of concepts and measurements. So when you create a data set, when you create a questionnaire, you have a specific concept in mind, and you theorize in a very specific way. So the question here that you ask yourself when you choose the data sets you want to harmonize is, first of all, to what extent, first of all, the concepts are clearly defined, and if they are comparable to one another. So we need very clear and unambiguous defined concepts. And then we know that, first of all, if we don't have these definitions of concepts, the result would be so la la. It would be weird, because the resulting operationalization and measurements of the indicators that you have will suffer, and they will differ. So let's say that you want to combine two data sets that measure, for example, education. I have a nice example for you. Eurobarometer measures education in terms of years spent in education, and that's it. Better studies measure education using a more validated methods. For example, what is your highest achievement in education? So if you want to harmonize those two together, you really have problems, because the concept is not the same, and just to be honest, in Eurobarometer, it's not particularly clearly defined. So if you have a specific construct of interest and you have differential measurements, so that you have a real issue on how to bring them closer together. So you either have unclear conceptualization of really differential understanding of the variables of interest, and then you have a real issue on how to marry those two. I have here 2 points. So the derived variables of context level measures, for example, can be also based on different concept harmonization. So we have the same problem also if we work on the macro level, but it's also important as an issue with the individual level. So both components are important. So in the macro level especially, the measurements come from a lot of theorizing. So for example, the rule of law, many of you have worked with VDEM data, for example, that is based on very clear a definition of concept. So if you didn't have that, you wouldn't be able to use it. So second problem is the data quality, or the unknown data quality, to put it properly. In order to be able to harmonize and to know what you're harmonizing, you need to have a good idea about how good are your data. Now, this information is rarely given. And that is an issue, because you don't know then the full quality of your own harmonization. So the final data set is, the quality of it is unknown. So one component that is unknown is the weights. So the treatment of weights for surveys from different sources, and potentially also different weighting processes, are basically ignored or not well documented. So what the main issue then becomes is you have inconsistencies or very unclear conceptualization of the target population, basically. So you don't have the target population in mind towards which the survey data should be weighted. And when you have multiple data sets that you have to harmonize, that problem multiplies. Second thing is the lack of information. So basically what you need is to control for characteristics of the source of studies. So for example, indicator variables on how specific studies have been, what decisions have been done for specific studies data collection. And that is particularly important in harmonizations that aim to increase sample size for in-depth analysis for small groups. So for example, with certain birth cohorts, you only cover certain source studies that they don't allow actually to disentangle cohort effects, because you don't know where the effect comes from. Is it an effect from the cohort, or is it an effect specific to that study, how it was collected? So when you combine different study designs, such as cross-sectional and panel data, then you have other problems such as different subgroups nested in different designs or measurements, leading to misinterpretations. Yeah, as combining different study designs, you don't really know where the effect actually comes from. So if you have, for example, combined panel data, but coming from different age groups, share the elderly population, FREDA, the general population, or cross-national surveys with panel data, for example, a share with, with ESS, then you have real problems on what exactly actually is the cause of the effect that you see when you analyze. So you don't know all that. And if you don't have information, you cannot have your user beware moment and actually identify where the problem comes from or where your results actually are based. Finally, documentation, replicability, and reuse, which is exactly the point that also Georg made. The problem is that papers, academic papers using harmonized data, very often provide very, very little information on the harmonization itself. So they don't give you, as a user, information about the decisions that they have made. So they just simply say, yeah, these are harmonized data, they're clean, so you don't need to worry about that. But they don't tell you exactly what is the basis of their decision making, how they decided on different measurements, and how they decided on coding. So as a reviewer, for example, when you review a harmonization study, you don't get the scripts of the harmonization. You only get the scripts for the analysis, if at all. And then the harmonization becomes a black box that does not allow learning processes and data quality checks. So harmonization in general is a very, very difficult procedure. It takes a lot of time. And ideally, it would be the case that when it happens, it will be shared. And it will be shared in such a way that other people can use it. So ideally, we would have in every publication that you produce as a secondary user, or for example, Eurobarometer, and that you harmonize and use the whole full scale of Eurobarometer, that you do it in such a way that is clean, clear, documented, and shared. I can give you an anonymous example. We had the case of extremely good publications using Eurobarometer, harmonized from the 70s until now. And we asked the authors to actually take the harmonized data and share them. They were very happy actually to share them, especially with the prospect of having their names on a trend file, similar to this Mannheimer trend file. But when we actually got our hands on the data, we freaked out. As data managers, data dealers, you look at the data on a different eye and you say, okay, how did these people make a decision about this particular harmonization? The do files that they were given were not annotated, the decision-making procedure was not clear, so the data were maybe good for them to run the analysis, but not good enough to share in any way. No documentation, unfortunately. So all this good effort that was put to harmonize, it went away to the waste. I mean, of course, they published nice papers, and research gained from the results of the studies, but nothing truly happened with the data afterwards. So we have at GESIS now moved to the direction of thinking how we can actually support the community to offer harmonizations. So we had some previous work supported also by CESSDA on actually how to document harmonization. That didn't go very far because nobody wants to put extra effort and harmonize their data. So now we're moving towards a more modular principle, the Baukastenprinzip for harmonization. So the idea here would be that we at GESIS, who sit on the data, would have the basic harmonization of the demographics that everybody needs, and then offer harmonization guidelines, including documentation of harmonizations, to everybody who would like to do the work. And once they get funded or whatever, and they decide to harmonize a specific component, because they can't harmonize all the variables, but the ones that are interesting for their studies, then if they do it on the basis of the guidelines, then we stack them on our own data offering. Then we have a harmonized module A, for example, from researcher Müller et al. It would be their harmonization module and would be offered to the community. We're far from this, but this is the idea. Next, I will talk a little bit about linking. And linking is understood as the process of combining data from multiple sources for joint analysis. It is not individual level records and survey data excluding blah, blah, blah generic codes such as linked open data. That is not the case. What we are focusing on is data linked to the survey respondents from different data generating processes. So AKA non-survey data. So for example, think about the Eurostat, or think about geolocations. So anything that allows us to add attributes to the survey respondents or in the context they live in. So here is a comprehensive differentiation that we did based on some literature review, how we can actually link data. So there are 6 procedures that we have identified at this stage. There might be more out there for sure. But here is just an overview of the linking attributes we have identified. So respondent identity, use of social network platforms, locations, respondent significant other, So there are different ways of where you can link as a basis, and then you use a linking interface, for example, the geo coordinates here, or website URL, or party identification. I mean, for those of us who analyze political behavior, and the record linkage is one element that we don't do, but what we mainly focus on is here network analysis, georeferencing, and so on. So this is just to give you an overview of what can be done with linking. Of course, linking doesn't come without problems as well. The ambiguity of concepts and definitions is exactly the same as a problem as with harmonizations, but I don't need to tell you more about this, so I've already talked a lot. The main problem that we have, however, is the de-anonymization. That's also fits with the question that I had previously to Gail. De-anonymization, when you link data, becomes more problematic because linking information about, for example, a geographical context, and if you have a respondent that is a little bit more outside the average, so you have, let's say, a person who has 5 kids, has a specific salary level, and responds that he's, for example, I don't know, a medical doctor lives in a small community. It starts becoming easier to de-anonymize and identify. So This is the problem that we have when we link, and we are at the stage now of identifying the correct procedures of, first of all, be able to give the data out as much as possible, but also restrict them as much as necessary. Third important problem is, of course, that sampling is not done with the purpose of linking. The sampling procedures for the surveys are done for the survey purposes, but when you start linking and changes the focus of the analysis, then the sampling most likely becomes not the correct one, or the weighting needs to be a different one. So same again, weighting problems as harmonization. And very often we have studies that fall into ecological fallacies, especially because, especially for those that use geographical linking, so linking based on geolocations, because the sampling is not done to analyze on the local or the regional level, but it's more done for the national level. Finally, the problem that we have is that the data that you link are not necessarily pre-harmonized. So the context variables, think about, for example, regional GDP per capita. Regions change over time. The borders of regions change. So you as a researcher need to find a way to follow over time and pre-harmonize this data and make sure that the region that you have in mind in 2022 is more or less the same as the region in 2070s if you do an over time analysis, for example. So harmonization of the to-be linked data is also an important component. Yeah, so what we are working on now is how can we support the community to do properly this type of work, harmonization and linking, because this is your bread and butter, what you do all the time. And we're thinking to move towards more data quality ways, not to produce a data quality, but supporting the community on measuring data quality. So when you use a data set, that you know exactly where your problems, where you might have problems based on data quality. There are, of course, from the survey design and methodology side already a few important factors that we can report on, but from the data management and coding procedures, there is also a lot to be done. So this is our way of now thinking and trying to develop the correct indicators that would support the community to evaluate data sets. I don't need to tell you much about what you gain as a user or what science gains from harmonization and linking. Many of the things that we know now about the social world would not be possible if we were not able to harmonize data across time and space, and if we were not able to link them with new data. But I want to focus on one more thing here, is that all of a sudden we are in a situation where we can link data from new data sources that 20 years ago were not possible. So all this digital trace data that we leave as individuals provide excellent context for individual people. So for example, Twitter data, even though we don't know what will happen to Twitter in the next few months, but Twitter data offer an excellent context for an individual, because the public debates happening on Twitter might not have a direct influence on you, but it's the context where you live in. So if an indication, for example, of polarization on various subjects on Twitter can have an effect on the everyday life of an individual, because it reflects actually society. So this kind of thoughts of how exactly we link and harmonize data coming from surveys and digital trace data that is in the next on the agenda for the next years, not only for us but mainly for you. Yeah, that is what I wanted to say. So feel free to ask questions, and let's have a fruitful discussion. Thank you.